Hello everyone, welcome to part 4 of the Ultimate Russia Guide. This is C-type, probably in the middle of difficulty in terms of just all the other kind of antennas that we've covered so far. I'd say it's easier than B-type, but probably harder than the other two. So anyways, let's just get into it here. So first of all, we need to know how to identify a C-type antenna. So let's do that first. So a C-type antenna is going to look a lot like an A-type antenna. You'll actually notice that we have the little clump thing basically on the right side here. So that's how you know it's kind of similar to an A-type antenna, for example. However, the A-type antenna clump was like up here, whereas this one you'll notice is actually quite far down in the antenna. So as you can see, it's quite low. There's a lot of space between the top here and this part down here. And so that's how you know that it's a C-type antenna. One thing to note for C-type here is that it's very far west. Like, B-type, it went all the way over in like Tumen, basically, I think. Well, it actually went into Novosibirsk even. But with C-type, you'll notice it is actually quite far west. You're never going to really be going west of like Kazan, essentially. I guess this cluster is north here, but yeah, it's very far west. So, even if you weren't confident in your region guessing of C-type, at least click like south of Moscow somewhere, like in Ryazan, for example, and you can't have a terrible guess. All right, but now to start getting into the clusters here. So I think one of the easiest is probably this Northwestern cluster. It's not completely easy, but I think there are some ways to differentiate it. So for one, I would say a very typical lock has this kind of like red gravel, or at least some kind of gravel. Usually a lot of gravel on the sides of the roads in these kind of areas. There's a lot of hogweed because it's very like far north. So you'll find hogweed anywhere in like northwestern Russia, I think, generally speaking, but it's quite common in these regions. In this region, you're always going to be like on some kind of highway, sort of. Like if you notice here, you're pretty much always on a highway the entire way through. Like if we go over here, okay, this is kind of an awful road actually, but yeah, and then over here, you're on a highway, and it's usually very claustrophobic. There's a lot of trees around you. It's not very open. It's very claustrophobic. Tiny roads usually. This gravel, again, we can see it here. It's a little bit reddish even. And I put this as another example too, because I feel like that reddish soil is generally pretty common, and yeah, it's also quite flat as well. This one's more open than a lot of Peskov, which is interesting. So yeah, but it also looks quite Baltic, which it is next to the Baltics, right? So makes sense. If it looks Baltic, has those features, I would send over here. All right, and the next cluster we have here is the Yaroslavl and Vologda cluster. Yeah, I always forget it. I always call it like I always confuse it with Volgograd. That's what I do. It's really stupid, but yeah, it's the Vologda and Yaroslavl cluster here. So we actually have two memorizable roads. You can actually memorize like a good portion of Vologda actually. So we have this road, which is, I am not joking you, there's a huge permutation document of this road basically. It's really sunny, no clouds. I think it's this road angle. And then it's also, there's a unique, it says unique gap between the road and the trees. And if you have all of that, then you have like the Vologda road basically. It's really weird. Actually, that also might be this road too, because this road looks very similar, just with a different road angle. And let me see. Okay, maybe this. Actually, this is sunset coverage, so maybe it's not quite the same. But yeah, you could basically memorize all of Vologda, like this road just being this kind of massive gap between the trees and the road, being C-type, being extremely sunny, that kind of stuff. This road basically being right next to the lake, and it's just C-type with sunset coverage, and yeah, it just looks like this. And then there's this road, which is also sunset coverage, and it kind of has a more or less east to west road angle here. As you can see, it's kind of going like that. So yeah, basically all of Vologda is just memorizable, and it usually has that gap between the trees and the road. I will say, be careful with this, gap in between the road and the trees. Like this can happen anywhere in Russia. You just need to practice a little bit to recognize that it's Vologda, and yeah, definitely make sure it's sunny as well with that one road. All right, for Yaroslavl, there's a few things I wanted to mention. So for one, generally north of Moscow, it's going to be a little more open. Like as you can see, it's not quite as claustrophobic. There's like some openness. You can see a little bit far away, right? So if we full screen this here even, like you're going to be able to see a little bit far away. It's not as claustrophobic. A lot of this area is May coverage as well. Like this is May coverage. And one way you can tell is from these yellow flowers spammed everywhere. These are very common in springtime basically. Now, if you see yellow flowers, don't just automatically assume it's May coverage. Make sure that you see these, maybe, you might not even see them honestly. And then you also see some like lighter kind of trees, right? So don't just judge it off of one thing. Make sure that it looks like May. So make sure, looks kind of light trees, kind of like May. And then if you see those yellow flowers everywhere, that could be a good confirmation for it, but it's not 100%, obviously. All right, next we're going to go into this kind of south of Moscow cluster here. So I'm not joking. I have tried to figure out a way to region guess this area. I honestly cannot. I even asked RussiaCord, the basically Russia Discord server, basically for this region, and they literally said, quote, plonk and pray. So yeah, there's not much I have to say. A lot of this is in August coverage. There's some in July as well. So if you can, region guess between the months, you can maybe do a little better here. One thing I will note is that the September coverage is generally southeast of this cluster. Like you'll see here, September coverage near Saratov, right? And this is pretty consistent. Like over here, September. Over here should be probably, yes, this, that. Like all of this area is September coverage, whereas this is August or July, I think. Over here in Voronezh, I think this is July. Yeah, July right here. So there are seasonal metas. If you see it, like a lot more orange types of trees, like in this lock, for example, I think it has orange trees, kind of. Yeah, like this is going to be more southeast, generally speaking, the more orange the trees are. So that could be a good tip there. One other tip we have here is Tambov trees. So Tambov is this state right here, and it's kind of a fake meta, so don't trust it 100%. But if you see these like tree lines, like these tree like rows sort of, and it doesn't look, eastern or anything, that's probably a decent tip for Tambov, but again, it's a pretty fake meta. It's not 100% at all, and why do we not have an antenna in this lock? Oh, we do. Okay, I was like, where is the antenna? But yeah, it's a decent tip, but it's not perfect, so use it wisely. All right, and the second to last cluster we have here is actually quite easy. It is just the Rostov cluster. So this looks a lot like Krasnodar that we've seen in other antenna videos, right? So it's very like no birch trees. It's September coverage. So don't confuse this with that Saratov cluster we just talked about. Don't confuse it with that. But yeah, this is going to have no birch trees, and that's going to be the main difference. I feel like also the soil is kind of that standard like darkish brown color. Just kind of looks dead a little bit, right? Yeah, I don't know. This kind of region, I feel like it just looks distinct with a lot of the dark brown soil, kind of dead agriculture kind of look. No birches, that kind of stuff. All right, and the last cluster here, if you're really unlucky, is that you'll get the Kirov cluster here. So, well, or this, whatever this is. But the Kirov cluster, I honestly can't really find a way to distinguish it from other clusters. I can't lie to you guys. But what I did notice was this lock here, and I'll tell you my thoughts on it. So a lot of these look like urban locations for one thing. So if you're in an urban area, maybe consider it if you think it looks like it. Another thing is there's a lot of hogweed, which is typical of Kirov. I feel like Kirov has a lot of hogweed. Another thing, the soil is pretty red. And so you might be thinking of something already. You might be thinking, well, that's a lot like Pskov, right? That's a lot like the Northwest cluster we just covered, right? And yes, you're right. But Kirov is a little more hilly from my experience. Now, this is not that hilly, but like it's more hilly maybe than Pskov. So, if you want, you could try it, but it's quite a risk to go for the Kirov cluster here. But anyways, guys, that's going to conclude part 4, C-type of the Ultimate Russia Guide. We'll be back next time with blurred type antenna, but hopefully you learned how to region guess C-type antenna. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in blurred type. Peace.